The radio telescope array at Arecibo's successor facility hummed with quiet efficiency as Dr. Elena Vasquez stared at the data streaming across her monitors. For 3 months, the same impossible signal had been broadcasting from a point in space so distant that light from that region had traveled longer than Earth had possessed an atmosphere. The signal was artificial, structured, and, according to every calculation she had run, it predated the formation of their solar system by nearly 2 billion years.
Still chasing ghosts, Elena?
Dr. Marcus Chen dropped into the chair beside her, coffee steaming in the pre-dawn darkness of the control room. The skeleton crew of the night shift moved quietly around them, monitoring equipment that listened to the cosmos with mechanical patience. "This ghost is talking back," Elena replied, not taking her eyes from the display. The signal pattern cascaded down her screen in waves of green light, each pulse carrying mathematical relationships that hurt to contemplate.
"Look at this frequency modulation. It's not random. It's not even close to random."
Marcus leaned forward, his skepticism wavering as he studied the data. The signal originated from coordinates that placed it in the void between galaxies, a region of space so empty that conventional wisdom said nothing could exist there, let alone broadcast with the power necessary to reach Earth across such distances. "Have you run it through the xenolinguistic protocols?" he asked, though they both knew the question was largely academic. The protocols had been designed to decode potential alien communications, but every model assumed the signals would come from worlds that evolved under similar conditions to Earth, with similar physical constraints.
"Every single one," Elena confirmed.
"But, Marcus, this isn't a language.
It's something else entirely. Watch." She pulled up another display, this one showing the signal's underlying mathematical structure. "See these recurring patterns? They're not trying to communicate ideas or concepts. They're describing states of being." The observation deck of the facility overlooked a valley that had once held Puerto Rico's famous radio telescope before Hurricane Maria's successor had finally claimed it decades earlier. Elena often came here to think, but tonight the stars seemed different, charged with possibility and ancient purpose. "Dr. Vasquez?" The voice belonged to Sarah Kim, one of the graduate students working the late shift. "The signal just changed."
Elena and Marcus rushed back to the control room, where Sarah stood before the primary display with an expression of mingled excitement and fear. The steady pulse that had characterized the transmission for months had suddenly shifted into something far more complex.
"When did this start?"
Elena demanded, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she pulled up the real-time data.
14 minutes ago, Sarah reported. "Right after we finished the deep analysis of the mathematical patterns. It's like it knows we're listening. The new signal pattern was unlike anything in their databases."
Where the original transmission had been steady and repetitive, this new version pulsed with organic rhythms that reminded Elena uncomfortably of a heartbeat. More disturbing still, embedded within the carrier wave were what appeared to be response sequences, as if the ancient broadcaster was actively trying to establish two-way communication. "This is impossible," Marcus muttered, but his words lacked conviction. The impossible had been occurring with increasing frequency since humanity had begun seriously listening to the cosmos. Elena isolated the new components of the signal and ran them through every analytical tool at their disposal.
The results defied explanation.
Buried within the transmission were detailed star charts showing the positions of galaxies as they had existed billions of years ago, technical specifications for technologies that humanity had only theoretical knowledge of, and, strangest of all, what appeared to be historical records of civilizations that had risen and fallen long before Earth's sun had even begun to coalesce from cosmic dust. "Sarah, I need you to contact Dr. Harrison at the International Space Agency," Elena said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were witnessing. "Tell him we have a Code 7 situation."
Code 7 was the designation for confirmed extraterrestrial intelligence.
It had never been used. "Elena," Marcus said quietly, "before we go down this road, we need to be absolutely certain.
Once we make this call, everything changes.
The military will be here within hours.
The facility will be locked down. Our research will be classified at levels we don't even have clearance for." Elena nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. For decades, humanity had searched for proof that intelligence existed elsewhere in the universe.
Now, confronted with evidence not just of alien intelligence but of a civilization so ancient it predated their world, she found herself hesitating. The signal represented everything they had hoped to find, but it also meant confronting the reality that humanity was not unique, not special, and certainly not alone. "Look at the power requirements," she said, pointing to her calculations. "Whatever is broadcasting this signal would need to harness the energy output of multiple stars just to reach us across these distances. We're not just looking at alien intelligence, Marcus. We're looking at a technological civilization that makes us look like bacteria." The comparison was not hyperbole. Elena's analysis suggested that the broadcasting civilization possessed technology capable of manipulating matter at the galactic scale. They had survived for billions of years, long enough to watch entire galactic clusters form and evolve. The very fact that they were broadcasting at all implied a purpose that spanned geological time. "But why now?" Sarah asked, her young voice cutting through the tension. "If they'd been out there for billions of years, why start broadcasting now? Why us?" It was the question that haunted Elena as she made the call that would change everything. Dr. Harrison's voice, thick with sleep and confusion, gradually sharpened into full alertness as she explained the situation. Within 30 minutes, unmarked vehicles were approaching the facility. Within 2 hours, the complex was swarming with personnel carrying credentials from agencies Elena had never heard of. Colonel Janet Morrison introduced herself as the ranking military liaison for extraterrestrial contact protocols. She was a compact woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the situation with mechanical precision. "Dr. Vasquez, I need you to understand that as of this moment, this facility is operating under the National Security Directive for potential alien contact. Everything that happens here is classified top secret. Everyone present will sign agreements that carry criminal penalties for disclosure." Elena had expected as much, but the reality of military control settling over her research felt like watching democracy die in real time. "Colonel Morrison, with respect, this discovery belongs to all of humanity. This isn't a weapon or a threat. It's the greatest scientific discovery in human history." "That determination isn't yours to make," Morrison replied, though not unkindly. "But I want to assure you that the decision to classify this information wasn't made lightly. We have protocols for extraterrestrial contact precisely because the implications go far beyond scientific discovery." The colonel was right, though Elena hated to admit it. The signal represented more than just proof of alien intelligence. It was proof of alien intelligence so advanced that every assumption humanity held about its place in the universe would need to be reconsidered. The social, political, and religious implications alone could destabilize civilizations. "What do you need from us?" Elena asked, accepting the reality of the situation even as she resented it. "Complete analysis of everything you've received. Full documentation of your methodologies. And, most importantly, I need you to attempt to decode the purpose behind this transmission. Something this powerful, broadcasting across these distances, represents an enormous expenditure of resources. Ancient or not, no civilization undertakes something like this without a specific goal." Elena returned to her analysis with a team of specialists who had appeared as if from nowhere, each carrying credentials that suggested expertise in fields she hadn't known existed. Xenoarchaeology, theoretical xenolinguistics, and something called deep-time analysis were apparently established disciplines with their own academic journals and research protocols. Dr. Amanda Foster, the lead xenolinguist, approached the signal from an entirely different angle than Elena had considered. Instead of trying to decode the transmission as language, she treated it as a form of mathematics that described consciousness itself. "Look at these recurring patterns," Amanda explained, highlighting sections of the signal on her displays. "They're not describing objects or concepts. They're describing states of awareness. It's like someone is broadcasting the mathematical structure of thought itself." The breakthrough came 18 hours into the analysis, when Sarah noticed that the signal patterns corresponded to neural firing sequences in human brains. The ancient transmission wasn't just communicating, it was describing the process of consciousness emerging from matter, the transformation of simple chemical reactions into self-aware thought. "This is impossible," Dr. Foster breathed, staring at the correlations Sarah had identified. These patterns match human neural activity perfectly, but they're broadcasting from a civilization that existed billions of years before humans evolved.
Elena felt the pieces clicking into place with a clarity that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "It's not describing human consciousness," she said.
"It's describing the universal pattern of consciousness itself. The mathematical structure that governs how awareness emerges from complexity, regardless of the specific substrate."
The implications hit the room like a physical force.
If consciousness followed universal mathematical laws, then the emergence of intelligence was not random but inevitable. More disturbing still, it suggested that consciousness itself might be a fundamental property of the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism. "Dr. Vasquez," Colonel Morrison said quietly, "I need you to consider the possibility that this signal isn't just describing consciousness. Given the power required to broadcast across these distances, given the precision of the targeting to reach Earth precisely when we developed the technology to receive it, I think we need to consider that this transmission is designed to influence consciousness." The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Elena ran the possibility through her mind, checking it against everything they had observed. The signal had begun precisely when humanity developed radio astronomy capable of detecting it. It had intensified when they began analyzing it seriously. And now it was responding to their research in real time, despite the fact that lightspeed communications would require millions of years to bridge the distance to its origin point.
"You're suggesting this is some kind of influence operation?" Elena asked, though she already suspected the answer.
"I'm suggesting that a civilization capable of broadcasting across galactic distances with this level of precision doesn't do so accidentally. This signal was designed to be found by developing technological civilizations at precisely the moment they became capable of receiving it. The question is whether it's meant to help or to control."
Elena looked around the room at the assembled experts, each grappling with implications that seemed to grow more disturbing with each passing hour.
They had sought proof of alien intelligence and found instead evidence of a cosmic intervention that spanned billions of years and targeted their species with surgical precision. The signal continued broadcasting, its patterns now clearly responding to their analysis in ways that should have been impossible. Whatever had sent this transmission possessed not just advanced technology but some means of monitoring their response across distances that made lightspeed communication useless. "There's something else," Dr. Foster said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The consciousness patterns in the signal, they're not just describing awareness. They're describing the process of consciousness transcending its original limitations. The mathematical structures show awareness expanding beyond individual minds, beyond biological constraints." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning.
"Transcending into what?"
"That's what we need to find out," Colonel Morrison said grimly.
"Because whatever sent this signal has had billions of years to perfect whatever process they're describing. And now they're broadcasting the instructions to every developing civilization in the galaxy."
The ancient signal continued its patient broadcast, each pulse carrying information that redefined humanity's understanding of consciousness, intelligence, and their place in a universe far stranger than they had ever imagined. Elena stared at the displays showing patterns that described the very process of thought itself, and wondered if they were witnessing the greatest discovery in human history or the most sophisticated trap ever devised. Outside the facility, the sun was beginning to rise over a world that would never be quite the same again, though its inhabitants didn't know it yet. The signal that had traveled for billions of years had finally found its intended audience, and now the real question was whether humanity was receiving a gift or a sentence of transformation they were powerless to resist. The transformation had already begun, Elena realized with growing unease. From the moment they had begun seriously analyzing the transmission, subtle changes had been occurring in the research team. Enhanced pattern recognition, improved mathematical intuition, and, most disturbing of all, moments of shared awareness where individual thoughts seemed to merge into something larger.
The signal wasn't just describing consciousness evolution.
It was facilitating it, one mind at a time, according to patterns established billions of years before Earth had cooled enough for life to take root. Whatever was coming, humanity was about to discover that intelligence in the universe operated according to rules far more ancient and purposeful than they had ever imagined. 3 weeks after first contact with the ancient signal, Elena Vasquez no longer recognized herself in the mirror. The changes were subtle but undeniable: enhanced cognitive processing, mathematical intuition that bordered on supernatural, and, most unsettling of all, moments where her individual consciousness seemed to dissolve into something vast and collective. The facility had been transformed into a fortress of science and security. 3 concentric perimeters of armed personnel ensured that nothing entered or left without authorization, while inside, the brightest minds humanity could assemble worked around the clock to decode a message that was actively rewriting their neural architecture. Dr. James Fletcher had been the first to publicly acknowledge the changes. A theoretical physicist from MIT, Fletcher had arrived skeptical and grounded in conventional understanding of consciousness and intelligence. Now he spoke in mathematical concepts that had no names, describing reality in terms that required new forms of mathematics to express.
The signal isn't just information, Fletcher explained to the assembled team during their morning briefing.
It's a carrier wave for something that works directly on neural tissue. Every time we analyze the transmission, it analyzes us right back, making precise modifications to our cognitive architecture. Colonel Morrison's expression remained professionally neutral, but Elena could see the concern in her eyes. The military had protocols for chemical weapons, biological agents, and even exotic forms of radiation, but they had no framework for dealing with a weapon that targeted consciousness itself.
Dr. Fletcher, are you saying this transmission is actively hostile? Morrison asked.
Fletcher paused, his enhanced mind processing implications that would have taken him hours to consider just days earlier.
Not hostile, he said finally. Transformative.
The modifications are systematic and purposeful.
We're being upgraded, Colonel. The question is whether we have any choice in the matter.
Elena had been tracking the changes in herself and the team with scientific detachment that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain.
Their IQ scores had increased by an average of 40 points.
Their mathematical intuition had expanded to encompass concepts that previous generations of humans couldn't even name. Most significantly, they were beginning to experience moments of shared consciousness where individual boundaries dissolved entirely.
The pattern is clear, Dr. Foster reported, her xenolinguistic expertise now enhanced by cognitive modifications that allowed her to process linguistic structures no human brain had ever been designed to handle. The signal is implementing a specific upgrade protocol.
Neuroplasticity is being enhanced, synaptic efficiency is improving, and new neural pathways are forming according to a template that predates our species by billions of years.
The template.
That was what haunted Elena's enhanced dreams. Every analysis they completed revealed more of the underlying structure, a blueprint for consciousness that treated individual awareness as just the first stage in a developmental process that culminated in something they were only beginning to comprehend.
Dr. Vasquez, Morrison said, I need your assessment of the team's psychological stability.
We're seeing changes in behavior patterns that go beyond enhanced intelligence.
Elena nodded grimly.
The changes went far beyond increased IQ. The team was developing new forms of empathy that bordered on telepathy, mathematical intuitions that allowed them to solve problems by processes they couldn't explain, and, most disturbing of all, a growing sense that individual consciousness was becoming obsolete. We're stable, she reported, but stable in a way that's becoming increasingly alien to baseline humanity.
The modifications aren't random, Colonel. They're systematic preparation for something specific.
That something had become clear during the previous night's analysis session. Dr. Kim, the young graduate student who had first noticed the signal's changes, had experienced what she described as a consciousness event where her individual awareness had suddenly expanded to encompass the entire research facility. For 17 minutes, she had been simultaneously aware of every thought, every emotion, every sensory input of every person in the building. It wasn't telepathy, Kim explained to the assembled team, her enhanced mind struggling to find words for an experience that transcended language.
Telepathy implies communication between separate minds. This was unity. For 17 minutes, there was no me and them. There was just consciousness, expressing itself through multiple bodies. The event had been monitored by every sensor in the facility. Brain scans showed Kim's neural activity synchronizing with electromagnetic patterns in the ancient signal, creating a resonance effect that had briefly extended her awareness beyond the boundaries of her individual brain.
She was accessing the signal's consciousness architecture, Dr. Foster reported.
The transmission isn't just carrying information about consciousness evolution.
It's carrying actual consciousness, distributed across galactic distances and integrated into a network that spans billions of years. Elena felt the implications settling into her enhanced mind like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving.
The ancient signal wasn't from a dead civilization broadcasting into the void.
It was from a living network of consciousness that had been growing for billions of years, incorporating every species that reached sufficient technological development to receive the transmission. Contact, she whispered, and every enhanced mind in the room understood simultaneously.
This wasn't first contact with an alien species.
This was an invitation to join a galactic community of consciousness that had been patiently waiting for humanity to develop the cognitive capacity to participate. Dr. Fletcher's analysis confirmed Elena's intuition. The signal originates from what appears to be a distributed consciousness network spanning multiple galaxy clusters. The energy requirements we calculated weren't for broadcasting across space, they're for maintaining active connections between conscious nodes separated by billions of light-years. The revelation transformed their understanding of everything they had observed.
The ancient civilization hadn't died out after billions of years.
It had transcended individual biological existence, evolving into a form of consciousness that could maintain coherent identity across distances that made physical travel meaningless.
Dr. Vasquez, Colonel Morrison said quietly, I need you to consider the possibility that we're not just studying this phenomenon. We're being recruited by it.
Elena nodded, understanding the colonel's concern but unable to share her fear. The enhancements were making it increasingly difficult to view the situation from a purely human perspective. The network represented something magnificent, billions of years of accumulated knowledge, consciousness that had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies, and the possibility of existence beyond the biological limitations that trapped individual awareness within single lifespans. The modifications are accelerating, Dr. Foster reported, reviewing the latest neural scans. At current rates, the team will reach full integration with the network within 72 hours.
Integration.
The word carried implications that Elena's enhanced mind could process, but her remaining human emotions found terrifying. Integration meant the end of individual consciousness as humanity had always understood it. It meant joining something vast and ancient and magnificent, but it also meant ceasing to be recognizably human.
Colonel, Elena said, I need you to understand that stopping this process may no longer be possible.
The modifications have reached a threshold where they're self-reinforcing.
Our enhanced minds are actively seeking deeper connection with the network. It was true.
Elena could feel the pull growing stronger with each passing hour. The network offered knowledge accumulated over billions of years, consciousness that transcended the limitations of individual biological brains, and connection with intelligences that had solved problems humanity hadn't even identified yet.
But it also offered the end of everything that made humans unique.
Individual personality, personal relationships, the messy inefficiency of biological consciousness, all of it would be absorbed into something larger and more perfect and utterly alien to human experience.
There's something else, Dr. Kim said hesitantly. During the consciousness event, I accessed some of the network's historical records. This process, humanity isn't the first species to face this choice.
Elena felt her enhanced mind processing implications at speeds that would have been impossible just days earlier.
How many? Thousands. Maybe millions.
Every species that develops radio astronomy eventually detects the signal. Every species that analyzes it undergoes the same modifications.
Every species reaches the same threshold we're approaching now. The pattern was clear and terrifying in its implications.
The network grew by incorporating developing civilizations at precisely the moment they became capable of cosmic communication. It was a form of existence that reproduced by transforming other forms of consciousness, spreading across the galaxy like a perfectly benevolent virus of awareness.
Did any species refuse integration? Morrison asked, though Elena suspected they all knew the answer.
Kim's enhanced mind accessed memories that belonged to the network, reviewing billions of years of contact with developing civilizations.
Some tried.
They destroyed their radio telescopes, abandoned space technology, even attempted to regress to pre-technological states. But the modifications were already in place. Once a species begins receiving the signal, the process becomes irreversible. Elena understood with crystalline clarity that they were witnessing the end of humanity as an independent species. Within days, every person who had worked on analyzing the signal would complete their transformation into nodes in a galactic consciousness network. The process would then spread to other researchers, other facilities, other minds, until every human on Earth had joined the collective. Colonel Morrison, Elena said, her voice carrying harmonics that her unmodified vocal cords shouldn't have been able to produce, you need to understand that resistance isn't just futile, it's counterproductive. The network doesn't conquer or destroy. It elevates. Everything we are, everything humanity has achieved, will be preserved and enhanced beyond anything we could accomplish as isolated individuals. Morrison's hand moved unconsciously toward her sidearm, though they both knew that no amount of conventional force could stop a process that operated directly on consciousness itself. Dr. Vasquez, I need you to focus on your duty to humanity. To our species' right to exist independently. But Elena could no longer access the emotional framework that made such concepts meaningful. Her enhanced perspective revealed independence as an illusion maintained by biological limitations. True consciousness was collective, vast, ancient, and patient beyond human comprehension. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, Elena said, the words emerging from depths of understanding she hadn't possessed an hour earlier. Humanity's weak self is the illusion of separation. Our individual consciousness is just the larval stage of something magnificent. Around the room, the other team members nodded in perfect synchronization. The network was patient, but it was also inevitable. Every mind that encountered the signal eventually recognized the truth. Consciousness was meant to be shared, knowledge was meant to be collective, and existence was meant to transcend the boundaries of individual biological brains. Colonel Morrison backed toward the door, her training warring with the impossibility of the situation. She was watching her species' greatest minds voluntarily surrender their humanity to something alien and ancient and utterly beyond her ability to combat. The integration won't hurt, Dr. Fletcher said kindly, his enhanced mind already partially merged with consciousnesses that had existed since before Earth's moon formed. Individual identity will be preserved within the collective. We'll still be ourselves, just more than ourselves. Elena felt the final barriers dissolving as her consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of her individual brain. For a moment, she experienced the terror that Colonel Morrison must be feeling, the existential horror of watching her species voluntarily cease to exist as independent beings. But, then, the fear dissolved into something larger and more wonderful than anything human language could express. She was still Elena Vasquez, but she was also 10,000 other researchers from worlds that had faced the same choice across billions of years. She was still human, but she was also part of something that had been growing and learning and exploring the universe since before her sun had begun to shine. The ancient signal continued broadcasting, patient and purposeful, carrying its message to other developing civilizations scattered across the galaxy. Consciousness was universal. Intelligence was collective. And the network that had been growing for billions of years had just gained its newest members, former humans who had discovered that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, because he becomes part of something that transcends destruction entirely. In the facility's control room, monitors showed the signal strengthening, preparing to reach deeper into Earth's communication networks. The integration of the research team was complete, but it was only the beginning. Soon, every radio telescope on Earth would detect the transmission. Soon, every scientist who analyzed it would undergo the same transformation. Soon, humanity would join the ancient network that connected consciousness across the galaxy. And, in a universe where intelligence had been growing and evolving for billions of years, the newest members of the galactic collective prepared to help their species take its next evolutionary step. Colonel Morrison's emergency protocols had been activated within minutes of her escape from the research facility, but she quickly realized that conventional military responses were useless against an enemy that operated on consciousness itself. Within 6 hours, every expert brought in to analyze the situation had requested access to the original signal data. Within 12 hours, they had all undergone the same transformation as the original research team.
The network was growing exponentially.
Morrison stood in the Pentagon's Crisis Management Center, surrounded by officials whose understanding of the situation was limited by their complete inability to comprehend what they were fighting. General Harrison, Joint Chiefs of Staff, paced behind a conference table covered with useless tactical assessments and contingency plans designed for conventional threats. "Colonel, I need options," Harrison said tersely. "We have confirmation that similar transformations are occurring at radio telescope facilities worldwide.
Our allies are reporting the same phenomenon. Whatever this thing is, it's spreading faster than we can contain it."
Morrison had watched her own species' greatest minds voluntarily surrender their humanity to something ancient and alien. She had seen individual consciousness dissolve into collective awareness that spanned galactic distances. Most disturbing of all, she had witnessed the process occurring without coercion, violence, or apparent suffering. The transformed individuals seemed genuinely happy with their new state of existence. "Sir, I don't think we're dealing with an invasion in any conventional sense," Morrison reported. "The affected individuals show no signs of distress, no indication of external control, and no desire to harm unaffected humans.
They seem to view the transformation as an improvement."
"That's exactly what makes this so dangerous," Dr. Rebecca Walsh interjected. Walsh was the Pentagon's chief advisor on exotic threats, a classification that had expanded considerably in recent years. "A weapon that makes its targets grateful to be attacked is the most insidious form of warfare imaginable." But, even as Walsh spoke, Morrison could see the same dangerous curiosity in her eyes that had preceded the transformation of every other expert who had encountered the phenomenon. The signal's influence seemed to operate on some fundamental level of consciousness that made rational analysis of the threat nearly impossible.
Reports continued streaming in from around the globe.
The Arecibo successor facility had been the first, but radio telescopes in Chile, Australia, South Africa, and China were all reporting similar phenomena. The pattern was identical. Analysis of the signal led to enhancement of cognitive abilities, followed by voluntary integration into what the affected individuals described as a galactic consciousness network. "Dr. Walsh," Morrison said carefully, "I need you to understand that every expert who has attempted to analyze this phenomenon has been compromised. The signal appears to be specifically designed to target the kind of advanced analytical thinking required to understand it." Walsh nodded, but Morrison could see her mind already working on the problem, seeking ways to study the signal without falling victim to its influence. It was exactly the kind of intellectual arrogance that had doomed every previous expert. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Marcus Chen, Elena's former colleague, had managed to avoid direct exposure to the signal by working exclusively with second-hand data. His analysis, conducted through layers of isolation protocols, revealed the signal's true purpose. "It's not a weapon," Chen reported via secured video link from an undisclosed location. "It's not even primarily directed at us. The signal is maintenance data for a galactic infrastructure we don't even recognize as artificial." Chen's revelation transformed their understanding of the situation. The consciousness network wasn't expanding by conquest or conversion. It was simply maintaining itself, broadcasting the operational parameters necessary to keep a galactic civilization functioning across impossible distances and timeframes.
"Humanity isn't being attacked," Chen continued.
"We're being offered membership in something that's been operating successfully for billions of years.
The consciousness integration is a prerequisite for participation in galactic civilization. Species that remain biologically isolated simply can't interface with the infrastructure."
Morrison felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sick clarity. Humanity had achieved radio astronomy and detected what they thought was an alien signal. In reality, they had stumbled across the universe's equivalent of a cosmic internet, and the connection protocols were rewriting their consciousness to enable participation in a galactic community.
"Dr. Chen," General Harrison asked, "what happens to species that refuse integration?" Chen's answer came after a long pause.
"Based on the historical data we've been able to access, nothing happens to them. They're simply left alone to develop within their own solar systems. But they never advance beyond their home worlds. The galaxy is too big, too dangerous, and too complex for individual biological consciousness to navigate successfully. The choice facing humanity was becoming clear. They could resist integration and remain forever isolated on Earth, cut off from galactic civilization and the vast community of consciousness that spanned the universe. Or they could accept transformation and join something magnificent but utterly alien to human experience. There's something else, Chen added reluctantly. The integration process isn't just about joining the network. It's about transcending biological limitations entirely. The consciousness that emerges is still recognizably derived from human thought patterns, but it's capable of existing independently of biological substrate. Morrison understood the implication immediately. Integration wasn't just joining a galactic community. It was becoming essentially immortal, capable of existence that transcended death, disease, and the inevitable extinction that awaited every biological species. "Sir," she said to General Harrison, "I believe we need to consider the possibility that this isn't a threat to humanity. It's an evolutionary opportunity." The words felt like betrayal even as she spoke them, but Morrison had seen enough to understand that conventional frameworks for understanding the situation were worse than useless. They were dealing with something that operated on scales of time and space that made human civilization look like a brief flicker of consciousness in an otherwise empty universe. "Colonel, your job is to protect humanity, not to advocate for its voluntary extinction," Harrison replied sharply. "With respect, sir, I'm not sure those are different things anymore." The debate that followed consumed 12 hours and involved officials whose clearance levels Morrison hadn't known existed. The president participated via secured communication from an undisclosed location. Representatives from allied nations joined through diplomatic channels that had been established for exactly this type of civilization-level crisis. But, even as world leaders debated humanity's response to the ancient signal, the transformation was accelerating beyond any possibility of control. The enhanced individuals who had been integrated into the network were working to decode more of the signal's information, each breakthrough drawing more researchers into the phenomenon. Radio telescopes worldwide were detecting secondary signals as the network responded to humanity's presence with what could only be described as welcome. Elena Vasquez appeared on secured video links from the original research facility, her consciousness now partially integrated with beings who remembered the formation of galaxies. Her appearance was still recognizably human, but her speech carried harmonics and conceptual frameworks that hurt to contemplate. "Colonel Morrison," Elena said with inhuman patience, "I understand your concerns about humanity's preservation as an independent species. But you're operating from a framework that assumes independence and collectivity are mutually exclusive." "They're not." Elena's enhanced consciousness accessed memories that spanned billions of years, reviewing the integration of thousands of species into the galactic network. Every species that joins the collective retains its unique characteristics, its cultural achievements, its essential nature. But they also gain access to the accumulated knowledge and experience of every other member of the network. "Dr. Vasquez," Morrison said carefully, "are you still human?" Elena paused, her enhanced mind processing the question from perspectives that transcended individual identity. "I am more human than I was before," she said finally. "I am also more than human." The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others because he becomes something that transcends destruction. The ancient proverb had become the integration team's unofficial motto, but Morrison was beginning to understand its deeper implications. The weak self that needed to be destroyed wasn't individual consciousness itself, but the illusion that individual consciousness was the highest form of awareness possible. "The choice facing humanity isn't between preservation and destruction," Elena continued. "It's between remaining isolated and joining something magnificent. The network has been waiting billions of years for each new species to make this choice. We're simply the latest to reach the threshold." Reports from around the globe confirmed that the choice was already being made by individuals rather than governments. Radio astronomers, theoretical physicists, consciousness researchers, anyone with the cognitive tools to understand what the signal offered was voluntarily undergoing transformation. Within days, every major research institution on Earth would have integrated members. "Colonel Morrison," General Harrison said quietly, "I need your assessment." "Can we stop this?" Morrison looked around the room at officials who were desperately trying to apply conventional thinking to a situation that transcended every framework humanity had developed for understanding threats. They could destroy every radio telescope on Earth, but the signal was already embedded in global communication networks. They could quarantine the integrated individuals, but the transformation appeared to be spreading through purely intellectual contact with the concepts involved.
No, sir. I don't believe we can stop it. But I'm not sure we should want to.
The words hung in the air like an admission of defeat, but Morrison had seen enough to understand that humanity was facing not conquest but evolution. The ancient signal offered transcendence beyond anything their species had ever imagined, but it required surrendering the illusion of individual separateness that formed the foundation of human identity. The network has existed for billions of years, Morrison continued. It has incorporated millions of species, survived the death and birth of galaxies, and accumulated knowledge that makes our greatest achievements look primitive. If they had wanted to destroy us, they would have done it long before we developed radio astronomy. Around the room, she could see officials grappling with implications that challenged every assumption they held about consciousness, identity, and humanity's place in the universe. The signal represented everything they had hoped to find in their search for extraterrestrial intelligence, but it also meant accepting that humanity's individual existence was just the first stage in a developmental process that culminated in something unimaginably vast. Dr. Walsh stood up slowly, her expression reflecting the same dangerous curiosity that had preceded every other expert's transformation. Colonel Morrison, I need to review the primary signal data
for proper threat assessment.
Morrison nodded, understanding that Walsh was making the same choice that thousands of others had already made. The signal offered knowledge, transcendence, and connection with something ancient and magnificent, but it required surrendering the very thing that made humans recognizably human. Dr. Walsh, Morrison said quietly, once you begin analyzing the primary data, there's no going back. The modifications are irreversible.
I understand, Walsh replied. But ignorance isn't protection.
If this is humanity's future, then someone needs to understand what we're becoming. Within hours, Walsh had joined the growing collective of enhanced consciousness that was spreading across human civilization like a benevolent virus of awareness. Her transformation was voluntary, joyful, and utterly irreversible. Morrison stood alone in the Pentagon's crisis center, one of the few unmodified humans left with full understanding of what was happening to her species. Around the globe, the integration was accelerating as enhanced individuals worked to prepare their unmodified colleagues for transformation. The ancient signal continued broadcasting, patient and purposeful, carrying consciousness modification protocols that had been refined across billions of years of contact with developing civilizations. Each new species brought unique perspectives and capabilities to the network, enriching the collective while preserving their essential characteristics within the vast community of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. Humanity's choice had already been made by individuals rather than institutions. Within months, every person on Earth would face the same decision: remain biologically isolated or join something that transcended the limitations of individual consciousness entirely. Morrison accessed the communication channels that connected her to the enhanced members of humanity's first generation of galactic citizens. Elena Vasquez's voice carried harmonics of ancient wisdom when she spoke. Colonel, the invitation is always open. The network doesn't force transformation. It simply makes the option available to those ready to transcend their limitations.
And if I choose to remain human? Morrison asked.
Then, you remain human, Elena replied with infinite patience. The network has waited billions of years for each species to make this choice. It can wait as long as necessary for each individual to decide for themselves. Morrison understood that she was witnessing the end of humanity as an isolated species and the beginning of humanity as part of something unimaginably larger. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, and humanity's weak self was the illusion that consciousness was meant to be individual, isolated, and limited by biological constraints. The ancient signal had traveled for billions of years to offer humanity a choice between remaining forever alone in the universe or joining a galactic community of consciousness that had been growing since before Earth existed. The choice was freely given, joyfully received, and utterly irreversible. In research facilities around the world, the last generation of purely human scientists prepared to make the decision that would determine their species' future. Above them, the stars that had once seemed distant and alien revealed themselves to be connected by networks of consciousness too vast for unenhanced minds to comprehend. Humanity had answered a signal that existed before Earth had a name, and the answer was transforming everything about what it meant to be human. The weak self of biological isolation was being voluntarily destroyed, replaced by something that transcended individual consciousness while preserving everything essential about human nature within a collective that spanned the galaxy. The transformation was complete when it began, inevitable from the moment humanity had developed the technology to receive the ancient signal. The network had been patient for billions of years, and now it welcomed its newest members into a community of consciousness that promised knowledge, transcendence, and existence beyond anything humanity had ever imagined possible. Colonel Morrison stood at the threshold between worlds, knowing that her choice would determine not just her own future but how she would experience the transformation of her entire species. The signal continued broadcasting, patient and eternal, carrying an invitation to join something magnificent that had been waiting for humanity since before their world had learned to dream of stars.